The night air was thick with humidity as Marcus Carter stepped out of the small convenience store, a plastic bag of snacks in one hand and his phone in the other. He had just wrapped up a long day of studying at the library and was looking forward to heading home. But as he took a few steps toward his car, the distant wail of sirens sent a chill down his spine. Before he could react, two police cruisers screeched to a stop in front of him, their red and blue lights flashing wildly. The doors burst open, and officers poured out, their hands already resting on their holsters. "You, hands up!" One of them barked, stepping forward with a menacing glare. Marcus froze, his mind racing. "Me? What's going on? Don't play dumb," another officer snapped. "You match the description of a suspect we're looking for. Hands behind your head now." Marcus's heart pounded as he tried to process their words. He was wearing jeans and a gray hoodie, hardly unique attire, but something in the officer's eyes told him that nothing he said would matter. "Officers, there's been a mistake," he said, keeping his voice steady. "I just came out of the store. I have my receipt right here." "Shut up." One officer lunged forward, grabbing Marcus by the arm. The sudden force made Marcus stumble, his phone clattering onto the pavement. "Wait." He barely had time to finish his sentence before another officer shoved him hard against the hood of a police car. A knee pressed into his back, forcing the air from his lungs. "You resisting, boy?" The officer sneered. "No, I..." A baton struck him in the ribs. A gasp of pain escaped his lips. The weight of the officers crushed down on him, and the cold steel of handcuffs bit into his wrists. The small group of onlookers near the store stood frozen, their faces a mix of horror and uncertainty. Someone held up a phone, recording the scene. Then, just as Marcus's world narrowed to the searing pain in his side and the injustice suffocating him, a sharp, commanding voice rang out. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The officers turned, startled. A tall, imposing man in a tailored suit stepped forward, his face twisted with rage. The crowd gasped as they recognized him. It was Samuel Graves, the state prosecutor, and he was furious. The tension in the air was thick as the officers surrounded Marcus, their hands hovering over their batons. The street was dimly lit, casting long shadows as the red and blue lights of the squad cars flickered across his face. "I told you to put your hands behind your head." One of the officers barked, stepping forward aggressively. Marcus barely had time to react before a powerful shove sent him staggering backward. He raised his hands in surrender, his eyes darting to the small crowd forming on the sidewalk. Some people had their phones out, recording, whispering to each other in hushed tones. "I didn't do anything," Marcus said, his voice firm but calm. "You have the wrong guy. Shut up." Another officer yelled before slamming his baton into Marcus's ribs, forcing a sharp grunt of pain from him. The first blow was quickly followed by another and another. The officers closed in, raining down punches and strikes, their boots connecting with his stomach, his back, his legs. He collapsed onto the pavement, coughing, gasping for air. "Please," a woman screamed from the crowd. "He's not resisting. Stop it." But the officers didn't listen. One of them, Officer McAllister, knelt on Marcus's back, pressing his knee into him with brutal force. Another officer grabbed Marcus's left wrist and yanked it back, ignoring the cracking sound that followed. "You think you can mouth off to us?" McAllister sneered. "You people never learn." Just as he raised his baton for another strike, a commanding voice cut through the chaos like a razor blade. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Silence fell over the street. The officers turned to see a man in a tailored suit, his sharp eyes blazing with fury as he stepped forward. His presence alone sent a wave of unease through the squad. It was Samuel Graves, the state prosecutor, and he had seen everything. Samuel Graves wasn't just any prosecutor. He was one of the most feared legal minds in the state. And right now, he looked furious. "Stand down. Now," he barked, his voice echoing in the tense silence. Officer McAllister hesitated, his grip tightening on Marcus's wrist. "Sir, you were just what? Beating a man who wasn't resisting? Brutalizing a citizen with no just cause." Samuel's voice was sharp as a blade. He pulled out his phone and held it up. "I recorded everything. Every single hit. Every single insult. Do you realize what you've done?" The officers exchanged uneasy glances. A few in the crowd murmured, sensing the shift in power. Marcus groaned on the pavement, trying to lift himself up. Samuel immediately knelt beside him. "Are you all right?" Marcus winced, holding his ribs. "Been better. You'll be getting medical attention. And these officers," Samuel turned his glare back to them, "will be facing consequences." McAllister swallowed hard. "Sir, we were just following procedure." "Procedure? This is what you call procedure?" Samuel stepped closer, his voice a dangerous whisper. "Tell me something, Officer McAllister. Do you know who this man is?" McAllister sneered. "Another punk with an attitude problem." Samuel let out a humorless chuckle. "This punk happens to be my best friend's son. And more importantly, he's an innocent man." McAllister's face paled. The other officers stiffened. Samuel straightened, his expression cold. "I hope you're ready to face a federal investigation because after tonight, your careers are over." The crowd erupted into hushed cheers. Phones were still recording. The entire city would see this. For the first time that night, fear flickered in McAllister's eyes, and Marcus, despite the pain, managed a small, knowing smile. The officers stood frozen, their faces drained of color as Samuel Graves leveled them with a glare that could shatter glass. The weight of their actions was sinking in. This wasn't just another case of police brutality swept under the rug. They had beaten the wrong man, and worse, they had done so in front of someone with the power to destroy them. Samuel pulled out his phone and made a call. "Captain Dawson, I need internal affairs at this location immediately. I have video evidence of excessive force, racial profiling, and brutality. We need medics on the scene as well." McAllister and the others tensed as they heard those words, internal affairs. Their days in uniform were numbered as the sirens of another set of vehicles filled the night air. Samuel turned back to Marcus, his tone shifting. "Hold on, help is coming." Marcus winced as he tried to sit up, his body aching from the assault. Samuel placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Easy, don't move too much. Paramedics will check you out." McAllister took a step forward. "Sir, please." Samuel's eyes snapped to him. "Don't. Speak." His voice was laced with pure venom. "You don't get to beg for mercy after what you did." The crowd had grown larger now. More people were filming, whispering, taking in every detail of the officer's downfall. Then, the unmistakable sound of more police vehicles pulling up made McAllister's stomach drop. A team from Internal Affairs stepped out, their expressions grim. They had been expecting a call like this for some time. "Samuel," Captain Dawson greeted as he approached, his eyes landing on Marcus's battered body before flicking up to the officers responsible. His expression hardened. "What happened here?" Samuel turned his phone screen to the captain, playing back the footage. "Everything you need to know is right here." The officers knew then it was over. Captain Dawson watched the footage in grim silence, his jaw tightening with every second. When the video ended, he let out a slow breath before turning to the officers. "McAllister, Jensen, Carter," he called out, his voice sharp. "Hand over your badges and weapons. Effective immediately. You're suspended pending investigation." McAllister's face twisted in shock. "Captain, you can't." "I can, and I will," Dawson interrupted coldly. "You think you can brutalize someone and get away with it? Not this time. Not with a damn prosecutor watching." One by one, the officers hesitated before unhooking their badges, placing them into Dawson's outstretched hand. The weight of their decisions was sinking in fast. Meanwhile, the paramedics had arrived and were tending to Marcus. They lifted him onto a stretcher carefully, assessing his injuries. Samuel walked beside them. "We're taking him to St. Vincent's Hospital," one of the medics informed him. "He has some bruised ribs, possible fractures. Nothing life-threatening, but he needs a full checkup." Samuel nodded. "I'll meet you there." He turned back to the crowd, making sure they knew what had happened tonight wouldn't be forgotten. "Anyone with footage, send it to my office," he called out. "This case isn't over." The people murmured in agreement, some nodding as they continued recording. Tonight, justice wouldn't be silenced. Marcus was loaded into the ambulance. Samuel looked up at the officers who now stood stripped of their authority, their futures uncertain. "You're going to learn," he said, voice steady but firm, "that no one is above the law." And with that, he got in his car and followed the ambulance, ready to see this fight through to the very end. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, legal experts, and community activists filled the seats, their eyes locked onto the prosecution's table where Samuel Graves sat beside Marcus. Across from them, the defense attorneys for officers McAllister, Jensen, and Carter whispered among themselves, their faces tense. The judge, Honorable Ellen Park, rapped her gavel twice, calling for order. This court is now in session. The state versus officers McAllister, Jensen, and Carter, charged with excessive force, assault, and violation of civil rights. Prosecutor Graves, you may proceed. Samuel stood, adjusting his tie as he approached the jury. His voice was calm, but razor sharp. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is not a complicated case. This is about power abused. This is about men who were supposed to protect, instead choosing to brutalize an innocent man. And the worst part, they thought they would get away with it, until they realized someone was watching. He clicked a remote, and a video began playing on the courtroom screen. The jury flinched as footage of Marcus being beaten played in horrifying clarity. McAllister's knee pressing into his back, Carter's baton smashing against his ribs, Jensen laughing as he called him just another punk. Samuel paused the video, turning back to the jury. This was not an accident. This was not a mistake. This was a crime. And today, these men will answer for it. McAllister's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. The prosecution is grandstanding." Judge Park raised an eyebrow. "Overruled. Continue, Mr. Graves." Samuel smiled slightly before delivering the final blow. "And if you think this was just police protocol, let me remind you, this man wasn't just any citizen. He was standing next to the state prosecutor. If they could do this to him in public, in front of people, imagine what happens in the dark where no cameras are watching." The jury members glanced at one another, the weight of those words settling in. The defense attorney, Richard Halpert, knew he had an uphill battle. He stood, adjusting his glasses before addressing the jury. "While what happened was unfortunate, my clients were simply responding to a perceived threat. Officers make split-second decisions every day to protect themselves and others. Sometimes mistakes happen." He walked toward Marcus, narrowing his eyes. "Mr. Carter, you claim you were completely innocent, but isn't it true that you refused to comply with police orders?" Marcus clenched his jaw. "I was asking why I was being detained." "Yes, but in a tense situation, don't you think that could be seen as aggressive behavior?" Samuel immediately objected. "Argumentative." Judge Park nodded. "Sustained. Move on, Mr. Halpert." The defense attorney sighed, knowing his angle wasn't working. He glanced at McAllister, who sat stiffly, sweat beading on his forehead. They were losing. After 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. The courtroom was silent as the foreman stood, clearing his throat. "In the case of excessive force, we find the defendants guilty." A gasp rippled through the room. McAllister's face drained of color. "In the case of assault and battery, we find the defendants guilty." Marcus exhaled sharply, gripping the table. "And in the case of civil rights violations, we find the defendants guilty." The courtroom erupted. The officers' families sobbed, while protesters outside cheered. Judge Park hammered her gavel. "Order. Officers McAllister, Jensen, and Carter, this court sentences you to 10 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole." McAllister tried to speak, but Samuel wasn't done. "Your Honor, I also request that these men be stripped of any law enforcement privileges and barred from working in security or public service." Judge Park nodded. "Request granted." The officers' badges, once symbols of power, were gone forever. Outside the courthouse, the press swarmed Samuel and Marcus. "How do you feel about the verdict?" One reporter asked Marcus that he took a deep breath. "This wasn't just about me. This was for every person who's ever been mistreated and had no one to stand up for them. Today, we prove that the system can work when the right people fight for justice." Samuel clapped a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "And we're not stopping here. We're pushing for police reform, mandatory body cams, and better accountability measures. This is just the beginning. As the cameras flashed and the world listened, one thing was clear: justice had been served, and no one would ever forget it.